Hello everybody and welcome to another video in our food law series. And today we thought we would have a look at vegetarian, vegan and plant-based claims. And I'm really pleased that we're joined by colleagues from all across Europe. So Katrina Anderson from the UK, Gail Saint-Jean from our Paris office, Louis Hofferman from Belgium, Samuel Martinez from Spain and Laura Klein from Germany. So welcome everybody. I know we're going to have an interesting discussion here. Let me just start by setting the scene because there isn't actually any legal definition of vegan, vegetarian, and plant-based across anywhere in Europe. So we don't have any legal definitions to work with. Typically, I think what we're working with is the concept of whether or not the claims are misleading. And I think we've seen there's quite a lot of variance across Europe as to how strictly this is really being enforced and whether there have been any cases challenging those concepts and what they really mean. So let's start in the UK, where I think we've got probably the most interesting decision that's been made, Katrina. But do you want to set the scene a little bit first and just explain how we've been approaching it in the UK?
So, the position in the UK for a long time has been that the industry has relied on the Vegetarian Society's definition of vegan and vegetarian. And it has generally been accepted that if your product meets these requirements, to call it vegetarian or vegan, it is not misleading. But we've had a huge explosion in the UK, lots of interest, lots of new products, particularly vegan products, as a result of Vegan January. And we've also started to get these plant based claims as well. And we had a decision by the Advertising Standards Authority last year, which was very interesting in this area because for the first time, the regulator looked at what plant based meant because no one was quite sure what that was. Maybe it was perhaps a slightly lesser standard. But actually, the regulator came in and said, no, plant based is effectively the same as vegan. So you are claiming that your product has no meat of animal origin, but also no dairy in it. And they were very, very strict in their ruling, and there was a great deal of negative publicity for the food manufacturer concerned about the fact that actually this burger had egg mayonnaise and was cooked on a grill. Which was used to cook meat, and a disclaimer was not sufficient to deal with this point.
That's really interesting, Katrina. So we've got this clear guidance coming out, this clear case coming out of the ASA that actually vegan and plant-based, those two terms can be used interchangeably and they mean the same things to consumers. And I think also we've seen some developments around some international standards actually coming out and providing some definition around these terms as well. And there's an international standard, ISO 23662, that came out, I think, at the beginning of this year, 2021, which actually also provides some further definition. Have you seen that being applied?
It's very, very new. So we haven't yet, we know that it is being applied in the industry, but we haven't yet had a regulator look at it. And it will be interesting because it is in some ways different to the Vegetarian Society's definition. So it will be interesting to see which way the regulator goes, whether they say, actually, no, we're going to stick with the Vegetarian Society's definitions, or whether we're going to actually move to what is arguably a more modern standard, which deals with things like lab grown meat more sensibly with the ISO standard. But that is still on the fence, so it's a little bit unclear.
Okay, let's turn to Gail in France. So, Gail, so similar question to you. We don't have that legal definition. So, do you see lots of vegetarian and vegan products on the market? And if so, how are they labeled?
Yes, clearly in France it's the same. We have a real boom. We have been a real boom for years now. So it's a very big market in France now. But it's interesting to see that we don't have exactly the same issues, if I may say, or at least the same point of vigilance in France. As far as we don't have any legal definition, like in the UK, lots of private certifications have developed. So we have this first possibility to inform the consumers about the reality of the vegan or plant-based claim. But this has led anyway the French authorities to conduct an investigation recently, last year. And it's interesting to note that the main point of focus was really the fact that these new products on the market used very often names usually used to designate foodstuff of animal origin. I mean, what we can call meat names such as sausages or fillet or steak. And this has been actually a huge debate in France. And at the end, the government came up with a new law last year, in June last year, and I think we are almost the only one in Europe with this specific law. So it was a law on the transparency of food products. And so they have decided to prohibit totally the use of names usually used to designate foodstuff of animal origin to describe foodstuffs containing plant proteins. The thing is, we are expecting an implementing decree to fix this amount of plant protein beyond which the designation is not possible. And so, as long as we don't have the decree, the law is not applicable in France. But anyway, it's a very strong sign of I would say, the strength of the meat lobby in France. And also a sign that it doesn't go exactly in the same direction as Europe.
And Gail, to be clear, I mean, this is separate to the discussion that's going on in the European Parliament at the moment around the Common Agricultural Policy. So France has sort of gone out on its own volition and said, actually, no, we're not going to have any of that meat or dairy terminology applying to plant-based products, or only potentially products that have a certain degree of plant protein in them.
Exactly. As regards dairy names, the position would be the same as in Europe, because the position is also very strict in Europe. But as regards meat products, here really the lobby of the meat has really struggled, has really fight again this new arrival of product using meat names. By saying that it's also time for these new types of products to find their own designation and their own names. So that's also, we are expecting now the vegan products to be creative, I would say.
Yes, indeed. I think watch this space on the advertising. I think we see lots of creative advertising by plant-based products, don't we? Louis, let's just turn to Belgium then, because I think a sort of similar position there in terms of some of the certifications that you're seeing. But tell us a little bit about what's going on in the Belgian market.
Yeah, so as for the other markets, vegan and vegetarian food is a sector that's booming, and this is a real lifestyle that people choose to adopt, and that has a growing popularity. It doesn't come as a surprise that there's no legal definition either for vegan or vegetarian food, and for that matter, plant-based products. What we see is a bit similar situation as in France, is private labels or private certifications adopted by associations defending vegan or vegetarian values, or even some companies adopting their own definition of what is vegan and putting their own label on food, which is still a bit dangerous for consumers, because none of these labels have legal backing and they're defined by this association. And food producers are free to adhere or not to these labeling and associations. So there's still caution required when you're wants to eat vegan or vegetarian or plant-based in Belgium, as well, there's no set legal criteria on the use of pictograms or claims. And we have seen in the industry that vegan and vegetarians are often confused for each other.
And do you think there's going to be any change coming up in the future in Belgium?
There's a demand for change from the industry. There's no legal initiatives at this stage, but it could definitely change in the future.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Let's go to Germany and to Laura. So, Laura, again, what happens in Germany? What kind of definitions are there that might help a food business in Germany?
So yeah, we have no binding legal definition at this point in time for the terms vegan or vegetarian. And it is very nice to have this this definition of the German Football Committee since 2018, which is a guideline for vegan and vegetarian foods that are similar to foods of animal origin. So it's really helpful for the whole market because actually these guidelines include definitions for vegan and vegetarian. And so vegan are food products that are not of animal origin or contain ingredients, processing aids, or other substances of animal origin. And in the vegetarian definition, which is based on the vegan definition, the products may also contain dairy, eggs, and bee honey, and so on. So yeah, as said, these guidelines are not legally binding, but widely used. And yeah, they have some credibility because the definition or the guidelines were approved by various consumer protection ministers. And so they may therefore be used by the local food authorities, but the guidelines are not binding for courts if a case goes to court. So we have this definition that is currently used in the market, but yeah, there are no court cases, no actual court cases which use these definitions.
And do you think that those sort of informal guidelines, are they likely to be revised at any point?
Yeah, they're currently revised because there was a lot of critique in the market. And yeah, we might see maybe a new version is published within this year. So it remains to be seen. Yeah.
And those guidelines currently don't deal with that definition of plant-based. They just deal with vegetarian and vegan.
Exactly. And there's no clear understanding if plant-based and vegan means the same in Germany. And it is an ongoing discussion, but yeah, from the consumer point of view, it's most likely that the terms are used interchangeably.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Let's go to Sam then in Spain. So Sam, Spain is a bit more relaxed about all of this, or what's the position with vegetarian and vegan claims?
Well, it's not a question on being relaxed, but we do not have a legal definition, surprise, like the other countries. So we tend to take a benchmark, the Spanish dictionary published by the Royal Academy. They define what is meant by vegetarianism, that they state that it's a dietary regime mainly based on the consumption of vegetable products, but also admitting products obtained from live animals such as eggs and milk. So that could serve as a benchmark. And also with veganism, that they refer to an attitude based on rejecting foods or consumption products from animal origin. So at least this could serve to have an idea of what is meant. It is true that there is a legal definition on plant-based products related to those products that are unprocessed, that are from plant origin, and that have undergone through a simple preparation. And the question is always on the side that is the same plant origin as vegan. We can use the same terms for both products. In our view, this could be the interpretation to be made probably, and what the consumers interpret from this type of products. But it is true that there is no any kind of resolution or a court judgment that could help us to infer that. So in that sense, it's difficult to ascertain a specific position. It is true that, as always, for this type of advertising or labeling, the general rules should be applied. They should not mislead the consumers at any time. But in our view, there is a general practice in the market of using this, we could say, European or label, the B label for vegan products. So there is a common acceptance that the products that are there that include this kind of label are the proper ones, or are addressed to those specific consumers that are seeking for this type of products. Probably it could be something challenging sometimes to differentiate eco products from vegan products, because sometimes consumers tend to interpret that are the same, and in our view, this could be an important confusion about the origin and how the food is in fact manufactured. But that's mainly the position here. Probably we could not totally rule out that the industry at some point, or even the government, tend to regulate in a more precise way what type of products could include this type of claims. But for the time being, there is no a lot of intervention. It is generally accepted this be label in the market, and it does not seem that consumer associations or other relevant stakeholders tend to initiate or are interested in changing things for the moment.
I think what's particularly interesting about Spain, though, is that you actually have a definition of plant-based, albeit that it sits within that sort of slightly different, or the focus of the legislation that the definition sits within is slightly different. It's not really looking at it purely from a food perspective. It's looking at it from a plant health perspective. So I think it's interesting that of all of the European countries, actually Spain does have something on that ground. Well, I think that's been a really helpful run through. I think this is clearly a space where we're going to have to watch what happens. We'll see how the international standards are actually applied, and whether we see that being applied widely within Europe, and actually whether there is some kind of landing point, whether we follow the UK's position as to whether vegan and plant-based does mean the same thing, or whether actually there are some different nuances with those two terms in particular. But thank you very much for joining us, and until next time, we'll see you again. Thank you.